we're going to be looking at quadratic graphs, and what we're going to be focusing on is how to find the equation of these quadratic graphs. So one way we're going to find these equations of my quadratic graphs is to use the intercepts. Okay, so if we take a look at the graph of the parabola that I have here, we can see it passes through these two x-intercepts. Okay, so the first one, okay, well we know it passes through x equals to -1. Now if I write that in my equation, what I'm going to write is sort of a factor, y equals to x plus 1. Okay, now we have that constant number a at the front, but let's not worry about that now. Okay, we'll get to that in a bit. But first of all, okay, x equals to -1 is the intercept. So when I write it in my equation, we're going to write the factor x plus 1. Okay, now similarly, my next intercept, we have one at x equals to 3. Okay, so if we write that up, we're going to write it in a factor of x minus 3. So we're almost there. We've got most part of the equation, but we still have this number a at the front. Okay, now the a is just some constant number. Okay, now what that a describes is the shape of this parabola. Okay, because there are many parabolas that go through these two intercepts. So for example, we have this parabola here. We might have a bit of a flatter one that goes through like this, okay, but still has these same intercepts. Or we might even have a parabola that still goes through those intercepts, but is a lot deeper or steeper. Okay, so that magnitude is going to be determined by the letter A here, okay, or that number. So in order to find that number, how are we going to do it? Okay, so we have this equation so far. Now, another thing we do know about this is, okay, well it passes through that point there, okay, which is the point 0, -3, okay, which is also the y-intercept. Okay, so we know for a fact that this graph passes through this point. That means if this point is substituted into my equation, then the equation should work. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, and that's how I'm going to find A. So substitute x equals to 0 and y equals to -3 into my equation. Okay, so put -3 into your y's, and into these x's, I want you to put x equals to 0. So if we do that, it's going to look like this. And if we want to simplify and get rid of all the brackets, we're left with this. So a is equal to 1. Okay, so now that we find the value of a, we still want to find the equation of the graph. So I want you to rewrite this equation that we found earlier and replace it with a equals to 1. Okay, so my final equation of my quadratic is y equals to x plus 1 times x minus 3. Okay, so we did this by finding the intercepts. So that was the first one. Okay, let's try and find the equation of this parabola. Okay, so it's very similar, but the intercepts are a little bit different. Okay, so let's try and go through this because it's very good practice. So again, the first thing that we need to know is looking at the intercepts. So what is the first intercept that we find here? Okay, well we know x equals to -2 is our x-intercept. Okay, so if I want to write that as a factor in my equation, I'm going to write x plus 2. Okay, so when we set it up, let's make sure we write y equals 2, and let's put a there for us to find out later. Okay, and then we have our factor x plus 2. Now our next intercept is going to be here at x equals to 1. So if x is equal to 1, in my equation, let's write x minus 1. So again, we're almost there. We've almost found the equation of my quadratic, but we still have this unknown letter a at the front. Okay, again, that a, to find it, we're going to have to substitute some point in that we know that is on the graph. Okay, so what do we know that's on this graph right now? Okay, well we know right here, x equals to -4, x equals to 0 and y equals to -4 is our point there, which is also the y-intercept. Okay, so this graph passes through this point, so I'm going to substitute this point into the equation of the graph that I found. So putting x equals to 0 and y equals to -4. Okay, so putting y equals to -4 and x equals to 0 in your corresponding x's. I want you to write it out, and this is what we get. And if we simplify this and get rid of all the brackets, and finally let's divide both sides by -2a. Okay, I found a is equal to 2 in this case. Okay, so I found a is 2. Okay, so what are we going to do now? Let's rewrite this whole equation and put 2 instead of a. Okay, then finally this is our equation of my quadratic. Okay, so hopefully we're getting the hang of this by now. Okay, what about this quadratic? First of all, we know that it's upside down. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind while we're working with it. Okay, but still we're going to take the same approach. okay, we're going to look at the intercepts. So the first intercept that we see here is at x equals to -1. Okay, then let's write x plus 1 in our equation. And what about this one? We have another intercept at x is equal to 3. So in my equation, let's write x minus 3. Okay, so now we're up to the part where we have to find that number a at the front. Okay, so we're there for the, we got most of the equation, but we need to find a. Okay, well, what else do we know about this graph? Well, this graph passes through that y-intercept there, okay, which is the point 0.3, right? So that's the point 0.3, and it passes through this graph. So let's substitute this point into the equation of the graph that we found. Okay, so x is equal to 0 and y is equal to 3. So I want you to sub those numbers in, okay, into my equation, and this is what I get. If we simplify and find a, okay, a is equal to -1 in this case. Okay, so again, let's rewrite my whole equation and put a is equal to -1. Okay, and then this is my quadratic equation. Okay, which also makes sense because this is an upside down parabola, which means this equation should be some sort of negative equation. Understand? Now looking at the next one, so finding the equation of this graph. Now we have a little bit of a different intercept here. We have one that goes through the origin. Okay, so when it goes to the origin, does it change anything? Well, not really. Well, if it's here, okay, the intercept here is x is equal to 0. So when we write it in our equation, well, we're going to start off by writing y is equal to a. And then my factor is going to be at x is equal to 0, so I'm just going to write x. Now my next intercept is at x is equal to 2, and when I write that as a factor in my equation, it's going to look like x minus 2. Okay, so hopefully we get the hang of the intercepts by now. So this is our equation, okay, and then let's substitute this point into the graph. Okay, so to find a, okay, so -1 and 3 is the point that it passes. Okay, so I'm going to substitute x is equal to -1 and y is equal to 3, okay, into that equation that I found previously. So let's do that. Put your 3's in, put your x is equal to -1 in, okay, and if we simplify these brackets and find a is equal to 1. Okay, so what do we need to do? We want to find the equation of the graph. So this is what it is. Rewrite it again and substitute a is equal to 1. Okay, and this is how we find the equation of quadratics.